Okay, so here's a demo of 5 layers of AAC encoded video. So it's MP4s, AAC video, and I guess AVC video and AAC audio. There's a couple of 30 frames per second full HD, a 25 frames per second full HD, and 2 60 frames per second HD, so that's 1280 by 720 clips. So the frame rate counter's saying less than 30 frames a second, and my task manager is basically saying my CPU is maxed out. I've got a quad-core i7, I think it's 4th generation, and I've got a GTX 850M graphics card, 4 GB. So disk, these clips, by the way, are all running from a Seagate 2 GB external USB 3 hard drive. So the disk access is saying around 22 to 55% active time, and maybe reading 60 megabytes a second. So the output obviously isn't running the 60 frames per second that's possible from some of the content. I find that in general I find it very difficult to get any content running from Resolume to my external display at 60 frames per second. I did have some running earlier, and I don't know what exactly makes it drop. But generally the only way I can get Resolume to show 60 frames per second is if I run basically only the preview. So I'm not entirely sure the reason for that. So if I say in Resolume switch to using screen 1, which is the internal screen, we've had a bit of a slowdown here. If I go in here and have a look, it's still saying less than 30 frames per second. If I disable the screen, what do I get? Not much better, it's still saying 27 or so. If I kill all of the layers, my FPS is run up to 60. So let's try running some content. So this is a 1920 by 1080 at 60 frames per second actually, and that says it's running at 60 frames per second just to the monitor. If I try to run it to my external screen, frame rate's still close to 60 frames per second. I'm going to add another layer to this. So this second clip I've dropped in is 1920 by 1080 at 30 frames per second, and my FPS has dropped down to 30. So if I have a look at my CPU usage again, so my CPU usage is around 60%. And if I try to run these same 2 layers, I'll just disable the output again. So the FPS is going back up to 60 frames a second. If I try to run it on my internal monitor, looks pretty good, but what's the frame rate counter? Yeah, it's still saying 60 a second. So that's 2 layers of MP4s running. They're both full HD, one 60 frames per second, the other is 30 frames per second. Each layer is running my auto mask and tritone filter. So these are, but each layer has 2 effects on it. I think the blend mode's out, but I've got the opacity set up to 100%.